The ball is in your court now. The ball is in your court, I don't have to speak. It's a discussion meeting. I respond. Yes.
Could you talk some more about observation? Particularly the amount that the will... The amount that the will can enter into this.
I don't understand.
Is observation a voluntary thing?
Yes. When you sit down to learn it, one has to grow into it. So in the beginning, when you sit down to observe, it is a voluntary division. Not only a voluntary activity, but a division in your own psyche that you voluntarily accept. Sit down to look at yourself. When one has grown into the state of observation, then it is no more a conscious activity. It becomes a new dimension of consciousness. And then the observation is there. Not a conscious observer, but just the act of observation goes on.
Vimala, could you elaborate on this process of the dissolution of the observer? I don't understand the mechanics of moving from a structural position in which the division is there between observer and observed in the beginning, right? Where there's will, there's division between the observer and the thing to be seen or the goal to be attained, and then the inevitable dissolution.
When there is nothing more to observe, then the observer has come into existence because there was something to be observed.
But I don't think we're hitting this on the nail. I think we're hedging. So long as the observer is there, he'll continue to perpetuate the observed, otherwise he wouldn't be there. See, correct?
Steve wants to open.
I'm sorry. My question is I think fundamentally this. I think this question was also posed because Michelle had brought it up to me in Sanem, and Michael and I spent, I think, a good half a day trying to understand what it meant or what it implied. What it implied for the psychology that projects a situation in which he will create the circumstances to dissolve the I. The very action to dissolve the observer, right? By sitting down, by creating a structure, right? And saying, I will meditate, I will sit down and I will watch my thoughts. The question then inevitably becomes, who is this person that has created the structure? And in the structure, who's going to observe the thoughts? And then you have the division between the observer and the observed. It's created. Is that clear?
I'm trying to understand. You use the term I, the me, the self, the ego. You say my body, my clothes, my thoughts, my feelings, my theory. So you have a consciousness a form of energy that is capable of dividing itself into I, the entity that says it is mine, I and my thoughts. After all, the I, the me, and the thoughts, the feelings, the sentiments, they are not two separate things, but the energy divides itself into two. It's not a complete split. If it is a complete split and a complete separation, then you get a psychological case, a schizophrenic case. But this, on the mental plane, this division does take place. It is only the human consciousness that can divide itself into I and the mine. What you call my thoughts and my feelings and my sentiments is only your own reflection. You see, it is only my reflection that I am looking at. Now, I say that I have been talking about the mind, the feelings, the sentiments, the thoughts, my psychology. Let me look at it, how this whole business, the mind that I call my mind, my brain, let me look at it. Now, how do you look? Because there is no physical, material mirror into which you can look. So you sit down and just observe. Look at it. The looking at it, the observing, creates a state of psyche, a state of simple, non-reactional attention, which serves as a mirror. It is the state of non-reactional attention or a simple glance that becomes steady. The state of observation is the mirror. Now into that steady, non-flickering, non-reactional attention, all the knowledge, the experience, the inheritance gets reflected. And you look at it. Now the person sitting here in the room listening to my words, there is the listener, and still behind the listener there is the capacity of the psyche to be aware that he is listening. These two functions go on simultaneously. If you are sensitive, you listen and you are aware that you are listening. You are aware whether you understand it or you do not understand it. So the complex human psyche enables us to divide the psychological structure. Not that we are creating a new structure, it is already there. But you divide the energy to look at yourself. Now when you have looked at yourself, the looking is no more necessary. Still continue with the simile. You sit before a mirror and you are looking. You look perhaps at the first moment at the whole figure. Then you would like to study and look at every limb, every part of the body. You have looked at it. Non-comparatively, non-evaluatively, you have looked at it. When you have looked at the whole body and also all the parts of it, then the conscious activity of looking is no more necessary. Then the looker or the onlooker is not there.
How did he disappear, Vimala?
That's exactly what I am telling. Now when you sit before a mirror, you are a looker. You are looking at the reflection into the mirror. You wanted to look at it, and somebody says, go to the mirror. Then you can look at yourself. So by going to the mirror, you have created a looker, a person who looks. You have, not that there are two different persons, but it's a functional role. You become, out of the person, you become a looker, a person who looks, an observer. You go to the mirror. So now one who is going to the mirror, sitting in front of it, is an observer. Not that he is not a person, but he has taken a functional role of an observer, and he sits down. And first, the whole of it. Then the shades, the colors, the clothes, the limbs, the expression, the skin. Minutely he goes on looking at it. Now he has looked at the parts, the component parts and the whole. The looking is over. Naturally, the looker or the observer that had emanated out of the person has merged back into the person. He may sit before the mirror then, but he is no more an observer, because, how should I say, the purpose, prayojan ko kya kahe bhai? The purpose of looking into the mirror is finished. You have done it. That is how, when you look at the movement of the mind and the contents of the mind are exposed to your attention. Not that it is very easy. It requires an austerity of inquiry to look at the contents of your own mind. When you have looked at them, as you have looked at your physical body, then the looking is no more necessary. Therefore, the observer withers away. Not that you have to destroy him, not that he disappears. You are sitting before a mirror and now the observer comes out of your body and goes away and disappears. That's not it doesn't happen so. Does that become clear or no? Yes?
What is this process by which observing no longer becomes necessary?
No process. What was the process when you sit before a mirror? When you have looked at the totality of your being, minutely in details as well as in totality as a whole, when you have looked at it, what has happened to the observer? After that moment, where is the observer? Your eyes are there, they see the reflection, but the observer is no more there. When you go to play cricket or hockey or tennis, you are in the field playing and the set is over. Where has the player gone? There were not two persons when you went to play, but somebody said, now there is the player in the field now. You are the player. When the play is over, the game is over, you are yourself. You don't go on with the bat or the hockey all the time. I don't know, if you experiment with it, perhaps you will find out, because this is only a simile that I could use. When there is nothing more to be observed, observer is not an entity with roots or anything. You had voluntarily taken up that functional role of observing.
There are two questions, I think, that immediately spring to mind the moment one makes that statement. I think the first question is, why is it that one wishes to bridge the gap between the observer and the observed, or why does one wish to look at anything at all? I think that's the first question. And the second question is a question that's implied in your statement, and that is, doesn't the very act of looking, when there's this structure imposed, it's an extrinsic structure, because it's one that's coming from a motivation. It's coming from a projected goal, therefore it implies time. Now, alright, I'll stop here.
First question is, you sit down to look and observe if you want to investigate what the mind is. If you want, man lives through mind. All your waking hours you function through the mind, and you are not acquainted with it. You have only information. So you say, let me sit down and look at what this mind is, how it moves, what are these thoughts. So when you sit down to look, you are looking or you are observing in order to investigate what the mind is, to have a direct encounter with the mind.
But what is getting spasmodic and irritated so that it wants to ask this question? The self is saying, look at this terrible life I lead. Is it not? What else wants to observe in the case that you're presenting? Isn't it an action of the observer of the self to then say, I want to observe? And isn't the problem that he comes to understand that his very motivation is that which is going to block any direct encounter? Because otherwise he'll be projecting his goal, and isn't that all that the self can do? I'm sorry to push this.
No, I don't understand your question, you see. I don't understand, because I have said what I would like to say about observation in very simple terms. I couldn't make it clearer, or I couldn't make it simpler than that. I say we are always experiencing, we are analyzing, we are interpreting. We never look at something, perceive something, the bare cognition, the pure perception, a non-reactional attention, we do not know, and therefore we cannot find out what the mind is, how it functions. It is something within us. We are that, and we want to look at ourselves. As we look at our body, we want to look at our mind, because it is through that we function. That's the only purpose, no more. There is no other motive, not to change it, to transform it.
If there is another motive, though.
Pardon?
If there is another motive.
If there is
another motive besides just...
Then the observation won't take place. If I have a motive to change, to conquer, to defeat, to destroy, to do something, that motive will block observation at the very beginning.
So are you suggesting that if you are unable to observe, that you probably have another motive?
I only say that if there is any other motive than the desire to examine and investigate one's own mind, observation will not take place. If there is a desire to change the mind, to eliminate the weaknesses, to get rid of certain habits, if there are any other motives, then the observation doesn't take place. It's only the way to learn about oneself.
But isn't motive really the observer? I mean, isn't the observer exists because there is a motive?
Let me put this whole problem. I think at least three of us here are somewhat pivoting around the same issue that we can't make clear. I think, could we look at it this way? What if I ask whether at a certain stage in one's life, one is conditioned, and at a certain moment one says to oneself, this life is painful, this life is chaotic, this life is violent, right? Now, to understand this life, I must understand myself, this entity, this organism. But I want to ask, isn't that desire or that impetus also coming from conditioning?
If it is a reaction to the pain, to the sorrow, to the suffering, then he is trying to look at the mind through that reaction. It is not an inquiry. We were talking about an inquiry of what life is, what the meaning of life is. A genuine inquiry and a reaction to the pleasure or pain, these are two different things. So first of all, why do I want to know or understand life at all? Why do I want to find out the meaning of life? What is pain? What is pleasure? What is birth? What is death? If I am not interested in a first-hand discovery of the meaning of life, all these things are unnecessary. You see, it's a religious inquiry that one feels interested in finding out what's the meaning of all this. Not because I have pain or pleasure. Not as a reaction to something. Not as a reaction to some frustration or failure. If the inquiry is a reaction to the failure, the pain, the sorrow, then the inquiry will have momentum only as much as the sorrow has the depth. as much as the reaction has the depth. The reaction will provide the momentum, and when the reaction vanishes or evaporates, then the inquiry has no momentum. You see?
But there must be a certain basic dissatisfaction that, I mean, what is this, where does the strength for this inquiry come from if it can't be without a motive? There must be some force behind it.
Is it the energy of intelligence?
Pardon?
Is it the energy of intelligence? It is.
Well, we don't know. We don't know what is energy of intelligence yet, do we? Why should there be dissatisfaction as the basis? If you look at the world, look at the trees, the oceans, the rivers, the human beings, their petty little joys or sorrows, their fights, the whole life, don't you feel like seeing what is the meaning of all this? Can't inquiry be born out of an urge to learn, to discover the meaning? Because if you do not discover the meaning of life and living, then it becomes only a repetition of some mechanical process. You see the futility. You say, well, what is this oscillating between pain and pleasure, growing up, earning a job, having some status recognition in society, and then one day you die, you go to office year after year. Is this all? You see the mechanistic activity of mind and you say, goodness me, am I a prisoner of the mind? Am I doomed to be a prisoner of this mind that dictates my activities, controls and regulates? Is there no freedom? So this urge for freedom, urge for love, which we lack here in the society where you move to the east or the west, that stimulates the inquiry of what love is, what freedom is. There is an urge for it, so one would like to discover it.
But Vimala, I think that you just corroborated what Stuart is saying. If there isn't the sense of futility with the mechanistic mind, then this urge doesn't grow.
It is not, futility is not a reaction. When you see that the things are transitory, when you observe the nature of the false, the understanding of the falsity says, why do I remain with the false? Is there anything else? Futility is not dissatisfaction.
Isn't it somehow seeing the futility of mechanical living and at the same time seeing the futility of any reaction to that? In other words, sensing that any movement, any action taken as a reaction to that futility, to try to escape, is also futile. Is also futile.
Yes, if it is escape, it is futile. Mm-hmm. Yes. All the escapes will be on the mental plane, so they will be futile.
I'm just trying to get at this. How is it that observation without motive comes about? And it seems that somehow it must come about through a realization that any motive is a type of violence. Any motive creates problems.
If you would like to call the desire to learn, the desire to discover, the desire to find out the facts of life, if you would like to call that desire as a motive, I have no quarrel about the word. I understand by the term motive where the I, the me, the self wants to acquire something, to obtain something, to defeat something, to conquer something. When you want to change the object with which you come into relationship, when you want to do something with that, accept it or reject it or acquire it or eliminate, then you call it a motive. the urge to learn with which a man is born, the urge for discovery, the urge for opening up, that's not a conscious motive created by the defense mechanism of the ego. But if you are using the desire to learn and discover itself as a motive, if you call that, well, you may.
But you see, I think that if the response isn't instantaneous, then it is explicitly motive. If this, even if it's the desire to learn, if the desire to learn is something other than immediate, it is motive. You may call it to learn about God or whatever you like, but then you're in the trappings of thought which was going to project its own goal. Goal is a consequence of time.
Is that your question or is that a statement?
I think it's both.
You see?
I think
Because,
it's both.
yes, all right. If it's a statement, we have listened to it. It doesn't seem to be a question, because in learning there is no goal. You don't know where the destination is. That is what learning is called. Learning is not an acquisitive activity. When you are out to acquire knowledge, then it is an acquisitive tendency that functions through the brain. But in learning, you don't know what you will discover, what you will find out. The destination is unknown to you. It has not been captured into a concept, into an idea. So, the urge to learn, the urge to discover, the urge to find out preserves your freedom from the very beginning. If you accept that I am going to find out God, who is one or two, who has a form or no form, or personal or impersonal, or I am going to find out reality and the whole description of reality, if you have the blueprints of the destination and also the methods and the techniques and the timings, everything worked out, then it will be an acquisitive activity. It is not learning. You see? It's an intellectual grasping or grabbing. But I think the urge to find or discover, it is when innocence opens its eyes, it is an inquiry. I think in every human heart, this beauty of innocence, to look around, to listen, to find out, to discover, is there. We are born with it. Otherwise, a religious or a spiritual inquiry has no foundation except this urge. That urge has its own strength. You don't have to feed the urge with some intellectual theory or ideology to keep the inquiry alive. If it is a reaction, if the inquiry is born of reaction, then you have to keep feeding it. But when it is the simple urge to find out what is life, what is dying, what's the meaning of that, what is a relationship.
Is it just simple curiosity?
Curiosity is different from inquiry.
But the urge to inquire.
Pardon?
The urge to inquire.
Urge to inquire.
Would it come from curiosity? Wanting to find out something without having any motive.
What would you imply by the term curiosity?
I look at wanting to know how things work, and I can look at a child and just watch him look at everything. He doesn't have any motive for seeing something, just wants to look and ask questions or do something. Or I call him curious.
Curiosity feels gratified with window shopping. But when there is the inquiry, and that inquiry moves into an act of discovery, and you see something, then that perception results in your total growth. In curiosity, you may go from place to place, individual to individual, doing window shopping, what is here, what is there, and you get information. Curiosity feels satisfied or gratified with the acquisition of ideas, thoughts, or patterns of behavior. But inquiry results in growth. When inquiry moves into life, it provokes you for discovery. And a discovery of truth or understanding of truth is a tremendously explosive force. It's a dynamic force. It is not a sterile activity of knowledge or experience, but it is something tremendous. After that perception, you are not the same being. That is the difference between inquiry and curiosity. Yes?
It seems like the border between inquiry and when it becomes destructive can be somewhat fluently. People can say that they are just inquiring and they are doing beautiful things, but the action might be a bad one. It might lead to people, mutilating her. How do you know when there is,
How do you know what?
When the inquiry is just one, it's a pure one, and they're doing it just because it's there. That's the only thing to do. Do you understand what I'm saying?
When the inquiry begins to move, supposing your inquiry makes you learn observation. You are observing. Of course, you are observing yourself. You are looking at yourself, and you find that there is very much violence in you, or greediness in you, or pettiness in you. Then the ego, the self, the me gets hurt. The getting hurt, getting annoyed, irritated, if that obstructs the further inquiry, further observation, then we know that the state of inquiry is getting polluted or contaminated with the ego-centered feelings. The ego has taken over. If whatever you have come face to face with leads to self-pity and depression, because you see yourself things, you feel that your friend hasn't got them, and you come across things, immediately the ego puts you into a comparative approach and say, goodness me, I have got so many things, now how on earth am I going to find out what reality is? Look at that other person, he hasn't got it or she hasn't got it. The comparative approach leading to self-pity and depression or melancholia has polluted the state of inquiry. Sir, to be in the state of inquiry is the essence of discipleship. That keeps you in humility. You see? But that inquiry gets polluted, and you, if you are awake, you notice where the inquiry is getting polluted with the reaction of the ego, the reaction of the mind, where the images get hurt. So you may begin with an inquiry, and while you are learning, investigating, examining, observing, it gets polluted. One has to be very much alert to see that it remains chaste and pure. The alertness and sensitivity keeps it clean and pure. Secondly, if the inquiry is not genuine, my friend, if it has been stimulated by the influence of some person, if it has been stimulated by an intellectual provocation, some very good idea that strikes you, and you get under the influence of a person, of an idea, or you have been driven to that inquiry because of personal frustration or suffering, then the moment the suffering, the sting of suffering becomes mild, it loses its edge, then you don't feel interested in conducting the inquiry any further. Or you require stimulation. You become addicted to the person, to the idea, to the books, to keep the inquiry alive. An inquiry that remains alive by itself is one thing, and an inquiry that has to be kept alive by turning to one and the same person or different persons, that is an ego-centered activity. It's not very difficult to notice this whole game within ourselves, if we watch our daily lives, whether we are busy with the activities, economic or social or religious activities, just to watch ourselves. And the sensitivity tells us where the inquiry is getting contaminated.
There is the great tradition in Hindu tradition of gurus.
Pardon?
The tradition of gurus in India, in the Hindu culture, where you say that you get the guru that you deserve.
Would I say what?
You get the guru that you deserve. Would be in like, you understand, and you would know when the guru is the pure one, and when you should. I'm just trying to interpret what you just said about discipleship. On one hand, the pure discipleship of understanding somebody or some idea.
I didn't utter the word guru, did I?
No, you did not. You did not.
I was saying that the state of inquiry is the essence of discipleship. The state of inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
And that is very difficult to sustain the state of inquiry. But if your question about guru, if you have a question, then you can put it. I have no objection to it. The word guru, yes, there has been a tradition in the East, not only in India, whether you go to Tibet or Southeast Asia or China, not the present China, but China of 25 years ago, there has been this tradition. Now, I don't want to go into the tradition, but I may go into the word guru, because this is a Sanskrit word, very ancient word. The guru has been, the word guru denotes a state of being in which the I consciousness does not operate anymore. It is a state of being where there is no center as the me, the self, the ego. The life within that person has moved from I consciousness to it consciousness. It operates, that is to say the life, the intelligence operates. So, guru, if at all you call it a person, guru would be a person existing, operating, living, moving in relationships without the I consciousness, without the sense of me. He will be always in relationship with the totality. It's a consciousness without a center and without a circumference, though clothed in a body. That is a state of being. And a person who would live in such a state would have been called guru in the ancient days. I don't want to go into what is happening today. All of you know that. The state of inquiry is the discipleship, and the state of being where the consciousness has no center and no circumference. That was the mastership or the guruship, if you like to use the word. And when the inquiry and the understanding, the inquiry and the frontierless consciousness, they happen to meet. They happen to meet through life. Then that communion brings about the explosion of inquiry into instantaneous understanding. If you say, I am going to hunt for a guru, then I, with my mind, with all its disorder, confusion, ambitions, inclinations, likes and dislikes, I'll find out a guru that I deserve, the mind deserves. You see, it's playing a game with the word guru and the disciple. There is no person in that state where you call guru with whom you could have a relationship, a constant relationship, say, this is my guru, and a person saying, this is my disciple. There is no center with which you could establish a static relationship. Have I said something pertaining to your question?
Yes.
Can I ask a question outside the context?
Pardon?
Can I ask a question outside the context of the general talks?
If it is in relation to what I have been talking last 3 days, you may ask.
No, if it is outside. I mean, it's not based on what you have been talking for last.
Now look, sir, if it is nothing to do with what I have said, shall we spend time in that? If others do not have any other questions or points, and if they would like to have such a discussion, go ahead. But I think it would be better if we keep to the issues that I have talked about.
I think perhaps what we're also saying is that we can see the futility of the way we've been living, that we have tried to observe because of seeing this futility, and we find that we are unsuccessful in observing, which brings us to another stage of futility, and we don't know where to go from there.
What is being unsuccessful in observation?
Yeah, no, that's the trouble.
No, not the trouble.
No, but, well, all right.
What is success and failure in observation?
The ability to observe
Yes.
continuously or frequently.
Yes. Does it take place even for a fraction of a second? Does one find oneself in the state of observation, that is to say the non-reactional attention, even for a second, for a minute?
Yes.
Not the question of continuity or continuously, but does one find oneself in the state of observation at all?
Well, I can only speak for myself. Yes, I do, but very occasionally.
Yes. And then?
That's all.
And how shall I get it back, he says.
No, I'm not asked. I realize to ask that doesn't make sense.
Now, why do I conclude that I am unsuccessful? You see, as soon as I use the term unsuccessful, I have arrived at a conclusion about myself and about the observation. So I would go into the issue of, is there anything like success or failure in learning? Success and failure are terms that can be used or that are relative to the process of acquisition. Success is a term. Who decides who is successful and who is not successful? It's a collective judgment. Have I accepted certain measurements of the society by which I call myself successful or unsuccessful? I will only say, well, I find that sometimes the state of observation is there and sometimes it is not there. That's a factual statement. Now, from this, if I deduce a conclusion, I am unsuccessful in observation. Is that conclusion warranted, or does that conclusion introduce in our mind or in our life acceptance of certain criteria, standards and values of society? We have moved out of the sphere of inquiry and accepted the authority of evaluations of the society. Otherwise, the term I am not successful, it must be there all the time, and if it is not there all the time, now how am I going to get it and preserve it for all the time? All these questions are reactions of the mind that sees that observation is there for some time and otherwise it is not there. It's not willing to reconcile itself to this fact. It wants more. You see, otherwise the question would be, the observation is there occasionally and otherwise it is not there. Finished. This is the state. What do I do? Do I do anything about it or do I not do anything about it? That would be the question. Why does the reaction that we are unsuccessful with observation, therefore another sense of futility comes? Why these two steps? You see, it's a very subtle, the activities of the ego, the I, the me are very subtle. They try to corner you and obstruct the path.
The goals that you're the goals that you're saying are those of society. They could also be the goals that you've set yourself, couldn't they? Just as easily.
Yes.
I have
An inquirer has moved out of the social structure of success, failure, more, less. He has moved out of the psychological time structure of continuously, occasionally. You see, he has moved out of this because we had seen that time was a symbol. It was created by man's mind, and that symbol has a utility in collective relationships for organizing collective behavior. Otherwise it has no relevance to actual reality of life. When those terms come back to me, that the observation is there occasionally, sometime it is there, sometime it is not there, how do I keep it continuously there? Then I have moved back to the world of psychological time, accepting the psychological time as reality. You see the trick of the mind?
I have a tendency to hold in emotions, to express emotions that out to other people that I'm feeling certain things. And I have a fear that by pursuing a path of going into observation, observing myself, that it'll become even more difficult, it'll become even more difficult to express emotions, let them out, and to share them with other people. Can you make some comment on that? Do you feel that there's something blocking me psychologically, and that I should do something else first before I start going on a path of observation?
Can someone help me to understand the question?
It seems like he's saying that there's a fear that by going into self-observation, in the sense that you're talking about it, that it will make one more withdrawn and unable to relate freely with other people, and to express emotions. I already have a tendency to hold back emotions, which I know if I let them out, it would be better for me. I just wonder, I have a fear that going into a state of observation, it would maybe make it even more difficult to express my emotions.
And why must we express emotions? See? The emotions, the sentiments, the feelings are the ripples on the surface waters of psyche, caused by slightest stimulation or provocation in relationships. And they keep you busy on the surface level, not allowing you to dive deeper into your own being, where the source of love is, where the source of affection is, where the source of spontaneity is. Like thoughts, emotions and sentiments, ripples on the surface caused by words, by gestures. Then one remains in the field of activity, inactivity, reaction, that prevents you from growing into the depth. So in every relationship, at every moment, not the reaction, but a response from the totality of your being comes up, wells up.
You think that by going into myself and observing myself, that it'll become more natural and much more deeper. I'll be able to express myself much more deeply, more totally of myself in relation to other people. This is from what I understood from what you said.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Doesn't
Yes, sir.
actually go into oneself. I mean, doesn't one observe more closely both oneself and one's relationship to others?
Observing.
I mean, when you observe.
I can't hear, you see.
When you observe, don't you observe both yourself and your relationship to others? He's talking about going into oneself, but it seems somehow a little bit wrong to me.
I wonder if you remember that it was said on the second day, thoughts and feelings or sentiments, the prejudices, the preferences, all these are cerebral ways organized by man collectively. It is not my thought, my feelings, my sentiments. They are individual expressions of something collective. Though they are coming out of me, they have been organized and standardized by the society. When you are trying to look within and observe yourself, you are observing an expression of the human mind. And if you understand one expression of the human mind, you have understood the essence of all the other minds. It was said, I think, the second day, that we are tackling the global or the universal problem. When we turn the searchlight of investigation upon ourselves, it is one end of the global or the universal problem existing in our body. We ourselves are a thread, you see. Our life is a thread that we have got here in our hands, the physical, the mental life. But it is a thread of the cosmic problem. It is a thread of not only the total human problem, but the whole cosmic problem. So your investigation about yourself is factually an investigation of the nature of the cosmic problem. The individual is a condensed cosmos. He contains within himself everything that is existing in the universe. So when you are observing yourself and understanding what it is, in reality you are understanding the human mind as it is. Therefore, that understanding frees you from the narrow identifications and petty attachments and enables you to behave or to be with other human beings and their cerebral behaviors in a much more efficient way. To understand the total human race, you have to look at yourself and examine the contents of your own being. If that is understood, the secret of the cerebral or mental process of the whole humanity is understood.
Can I ask one question more?
Yes.
You said, I think yesterday, that by using a mantra meditation, for example, you will stir up the deeper layers of the mind. And some people say that using a mantra meditation, like transcendental meditation, it will become like a sound tranquilizer and make your mind very dull and inalert in a way. Is it so? Or how does mantra meditation?
How does it?
How does mantra meditation? What effect does it have?
I would hesitate to call it mantra meditation, because I would call it chanting mantra, which is one of the ancient techniques in the Orient to develop mental powers. Especially in the science of Hatha Yoga, it was used. A mantra is a scientifically organized letters or words intended to affect the brain cells as well as certain important nerve centers in the body for developing the mental powers, for developing the neurological powers. Mantra has second function, second role to play by utilizing sound energy, curing physical ailments and maladies. The science of mantra is a very ancient science, and there are many branches of this mantra yoga. And one studies the whole metaphysics of sound waves and vibrations in order to learn a mantra. It has nothing to do with meditation whatsoever. It is a technique, a method, first for physical maladies, second for relaxing the nerves. If there is a mental case, mantras can be used as a sound therapy for soothing and pacifying the troubled nerves. Third, for developing certain powers. I won't go into all these, but these I mention because they are relevant to your question. So, when you take a mantra, first of all, one who takes a mantra or one who suggests it, they have to study the person, how he speaks, how he breathes, how he utters certain words. You see, every letter has a vibrational range. If you say R, if you say H, if you say R, Ri, Rum, every letter has a vibrational range. That is to say, it envelops you into vibrations that can reach certain distance. And you see the person and find out what are the letters that he frequently uses. Then only you can suggest a mantra to that person. It's not a trick suggesting any word to any person. You can play around with it and you can sell and make commerce on anything, trade upon anything. And that has become a commercial proposition, unfortunately. But I am going into the science of mantra yoga, which has nothing whatsoever to do with meditation. It is a technique for education. It is a technique as a therapy for physical and mental health. So, when you utter a mantra, the word chanting is used in Sanskrit. The word is very beautiful, japam. Tad japat tadartha bhavanam. When you utter a word loaded with the full potency of its meaning, you are aware of the meaning of the letter or the word. So, the utterance is loaded with the awareness of the meaning. Utterance is loaded with the potency of the awareness of the meaning. Then it becomes a jap, not a mechanical activity of saying certain words or repeating certain words. So, if you are aware of the meaning of those letters, which have mystical significance, that was studied in Persia, the Middle East, Tibet and India, also in China. They have degenerated today. So, but we can look at the source of it and say that when a person is aware of the meaning and chants, pronounces them, utters them, but very correctly. You have to go into the correctness of pronunciation, the pitch, the modulation, the tension, and so on, because you are using sound, you see. You are using sound as a means to explore something. So if you have thus done it, then it stimulates the latent experiences contained in your psyche. Whatever has been lived doesn't get destroyed, whether it was a Jesus or a Buddha or a Confucius or a Lao Tse or anyone else. What is lived is not destroyed. It is contained in the brain cells of every human individual. So those experiences, by stimulating those nerves and cells, those experiences are stimulated and projected upon you. You feel you are experiencing those things. That is why I said in mantra, when you exercise your mind and body, you have to exercise the mind and body. You have to be terribly alert when you chant mantras. Then this effect happens. Stimulation of the inner experiences. Stimulation of the momentum of past that is contained in you. If you chant mantras or certain words which are meant to pacify and relax and soothe the nerves, then it works as a tranquilizer without any drugs. Well, I have been born and brought up in that country, you see. So one can go on talking about these things not only for hours, for days and weeks, to go into the deep science of that. Both on the Hindu, in the Hindu history, and also the Buddhist yoga history, and the Middle East, the Persian. And the fourth line of these studies was in Caucasus Mountains, near Georgia, in Russia. These four areas, people had been working upon these science of alchemy to cure yourself by stimulating certain acids and chemicals in your own body. The science of alchemy is a very ancient science in the Middle East and the Orient. So, by chanting those mantras, by enveloping yourself in those sound vibrations, you can cure the mental disturbances. You can pacify the nerves. It doesn't change the quality of the mind. It doesn't change the content of the psyche. But it brings about a pacification of what was before, a soothing. If there was tension, then it brings about a kind of relaxation. And thirdly, now we have turned to two issues. Let me turn to the third aspect of your question. That is, if a person goes on exercising the mind and repeating, in that chanting, certain sounds have to be repeated in succession, and your brain is busy with that, You feel the nerves satisfied, pacified, relaxed. So, the intelligence is put to sleep. It has no function to play. Instead of turning to intelligence, you are turning to the same body and the mind and putting it into a pacified condition so that it can fit into the society once again and function in the society as the society expects you to function. So it keeps you in the field of the mind and the brain. A little violent, less violent disorder, a less painful disorder. That's all that it can do. When it stimulates non-sensual, extrasensory perceptions and experiences, they call it transcendental meditation. It stimulates non-sensual experiences, extrasensory perceptions. Like if you take drugs, psychedelic drugs, they stimulate experiences and visions. But meditation has nothing whatsoever to do with tratakas, with dharanas, with japam, with puja. These are all processes in the field of the mind and the brain, having their own utility if you want to be in the mental plane and live there. They are beautiful decorations of the mental plane. And mind you, there is no sense of condemning, in my heart at least. There is no sense of negating, denying or condemning. In spirituality, there is nothing to deny, to criticize, to condemn, to negate. There is everything to understand as it is. To understand life as it is. To see the falseness of the falsity of the false things. To see the symbols as they are, as symbols, and not as reality. To see facts as they are, that perception purifies, and in the fire of understandings all the dross gets burnt and consumed by itself. Haven't we spent more than an hour?
Past 25 minutes past 12.
Yes, sir. Stop.
Can I ask a question you can answer tomorrow?
Yes, sir.
I will ask only question. Tomorrow you can answer.
Yes, yes.
I have noticed three things that you did emphasize the importance of health, vitality.
Yes.
Vitality. And you seem to have a quite thorough knowledge of Sanskrit language from your mantra chanting and your interpretation of Tat Japas Tadat Bhavna. And also you seem to have a little knowledge of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras because you just quoted one. So, in relationship to the vitality of whether it is outer of sensory perception or if tomorrow you could comment on one of the sutras, Brahmacharya Pratisthayam Vijalabha. It's a Sanskrit sentence, whether it is, you know it already or not, but it's purely from the linguistic point of view. If you could comment on that. In relationship with the vitality which you have emphasized with the help of Hari Yoga or Buddhist Yoga or, I don't know if my question, but that's it.
What is the question, Krishna? What is the question?
The question is that
the vitality and health I talked about. Yes,
yes.
I agreed.
Yeah. The
Then
relationship of this statement, it's a Sanskrit statement, Brahmacharya Pratisthayam Vijalabha. It is in relationship because you did quote one sentence from the same series. Otherwise I would not quote. So I want the relevance of this statement in terms with vitality of the being. the importance, or if it has any
What did I quote, Krishna? What did I quote?
You said Sajjava Sarat Bhavanam.
Yes, that is in relation to the question about mantra.
Yes.
Yes.
So I am relating three factors. The knowledge of Sanskrit language you seem to have, and you do emphasize the importance of physical health.
Yes.
And you do seem to have knowledge of sutras. So I am taking only one sutra, which for me is in relationship with the physical well-being. And the sutra is Brahmacharya Pratisthayam Virelabha. If you would comment from your side, anything on this, purely from Sanskrit language point of view, what this sutra could mean, or if it has any connotation with physical vitality.
All right.
If it is a relevant question.
It is not relevant in the sense that I have not taken it up. I mean, I have been talking about inquiry and understanding of the meaning of life.
May I withdraw my question?
You know, in India, as everywhere else in the world, the words and languages have been misused. They have been twisted and distorted by traditions. Tradition is created by individuals who would like to borrow the meaning or the experiences of other people and organize them. That is how traditions are born, east and west. Now, Brahmacharya Pratisthayam, Brahmacharya, that's a word in Sanskrit language which is being interpreted to mean celibacy. Celibacy, if there is celibacy, then that celibacy gives you vitality, physical vitality. As I have not studied English language or Latin or Greek, I do not know the origin of the word celibacy. But Brahmacharya originally means Brahme Charati iti, one whose psyche is always immersed in Brahma. And Brahma word is derived from the root bruhat, to grow. That which is ever growing, ever manifesting, ever uncovering its own essence in that growth. Bruhat. Bru is a root. From that the word Brahman was quoted. Now the traditional meaning, as you will find it in translations of English or French or German translations of the Vedas, or the translations made by those unfortunate Indians themselves, they have converted Brahman into a concept, into an idea, and also found out its attributes and so on. We won't go into it. But just remember, Bruhat, Brahma, ever growing, ever manifesting, ever unwinding entity. One whose psyche is immersed in that, is saturated with that, saturated with the awareness of the immensity and infinity of life. He is a celibate. Brahme charati iti brahmacharin. One whose psyche lives and moves in that infinity. He has no center within his body. He has no center in his inheritance. But he has been, how should I say, uncentered. The whole infinity is the center and the whole infinity is the circumference. One whose psyche lives and moves out of that state of infinity and immensity is a Brahmacharya. And if a person lives in that centerless and circumferenceless consciousness, then he has vitality at all the levels. The physical, the cerebral, and the non-cerebral. Of course, the non-cerebral is always ever fresh, but I am putting it for the sake of communication that celibacy, the word celibacy, which I am using to translate the word Brahmacharya, I don't know if that word connotes all this in English language, but in Sanskrit it means this much, you see. It's a very serious word to use. And now people think that if a person does not marry, then he is a celibate. If he does not indulge in sexual acts, then he is a celibate. That's a very gross way of looking at the term Brahmacharya. It's only one part of it, but you may compel yourself to remain a celibate, take a vow of celibacy, and if the quality of the mind is not changed, if the psyche is clinging or tethered to the center of the I, the me, with all its ambitions, greediness, acquisitiveness, then you may remain physically celibate. There will not be the vitality. There will not be the vitality, the freshness. Even the word yogin, the yoga word comes from the root yujayujjate iti yogaha, to be reunited. To be reunited with the centerless universe is the state of yoga. Yogi is one whose psyche is reunited with the whole cosmos from which it had been uprooted. That is a yogi. So Brahmacharya is called a yoga, Brahmacharya yoga. In Hatha Yoga, it's one of the most important things, but the interpretations, the interpretations have rather become superficial ones. And if you go to India today and ask people practicing Hatha Yoga or asanas or pranayamas, they may tell you Brahmacharya means celibacy, and celibacy means keeping away, abstinence or keeping away from sexual life. That's a very minor part of Brahmacharya. The essence of Brahmacharya or celibacy is in the nature and the state of psyche. That gets reflected in the body. Then there is no sex consciousness. There is no more division of I and thou, me and the not me. So the sex consciousness or the body consciousness is transcended spontaneously, not out of an effort, struggle, resistance, vows, disciplines, mutilations, torturing the body. Not that way. That way does not lie Brahmacharya at all. But out of understanding, spontaneously, there is a state of love. So that state of love, that state of awareness of the totality of life, that state of being nothingness in that totality, so that keeps you ever fresh and ever vital. I did not want to leave the question till tomorrow, because Krishna had asked some time ago and then we had kept him waiting. Then he asked again, so to leave it till tomorrow would have been rather unfair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. But that question I dropped. The first one which I was going to ask, I dropped
Do we meet at 3 o'clock downstairs? 3 o'clock.